Good evening, everyone. Oops, that's very loud. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. How many people are here from Chicago? Ooh, not everybody then.
I lived there for much of my life.
Oh, so you kind of count as a Chicagoan, do you?
We
All
have
right.
family. We have family there. So.
All right. Well, then there's a connection.
Yeah, there's
Right.
usually, there's always a few Chicagoans.
There are.
When I'm in.
And while normally Michael and I would talk about Chicago, which was where I grew up in Winnetka, we're actually going to talk about Boston tonight because he has set his new book, Pulse, right here in Boston. And in fact, in the 1970s, it's not right. So we just had dinner and a lot of wine. And well, that's an important part of dinner, right? And we had a conversation about what was the driving motivation, because this book is really an interesting book and it has some supernatural elements, and yet it's a detective story. And so let's reprise it. What's going on in the world that made you think that writing Pulse about a different time and place was going to be an important thing to do?
Yeah, I think, so I think when you look at crime novels, they often reflect the time that they're written in. When you look at like Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, they basically took the crime novel and took the Western and dropped it into the city, into the cities in the beginning of the 20th century. And then you look at how many people know Ross MacDonald?
Yeah.
You ever heard of Ross MacDonald?
Yep.
So Ross MacDonald basically began to look at the psychology of crime, and he did it at the same time that Jung and Freud were beginning to look at the psychology of the mind. And so, again, reflecting the time that the things that went on during this time. Can I get some water?
Certainly. I'll hop up and do it.
And so, what I wanted to do with this book, it's a hard thing to explain. I feel like we're living in a time where we're really not connected anymore the way we used to be. So I feel like technology is beginning to, it's supposed to bring us closer together, and it's really disconnecting us, making us much more isolated, making us much more not so kind to each other, I guess. And I really thought technology 10 or 15 years ago would do the exact opposite. I really thought technology, the internet and everything, would make the world a smaller place. In some ways it has, but it's made the world a much colder place, and a much meaner place, and a much more disconnected place. And people talk about this with millennials, that they're very disconnected, they're just looking at their phone, but I see it through all ages of people. People don't have any time for each other. And they're really just building, frankly, monuments to themselves. We want everything to be exactly the way we want it, whether it's our coffee, the way we drive to work, our music, everything is, and technology is an expectation that things are going to be that way. And as a result, we have no compassion or empathy for each other. We can't even tolerate different opinions. I know, because I have some people in my family that if they hear a different opinion from someone, they can't even let the person finish what they have to say before they're like, no, and then they just want to kind of rip their throat out. And I'm like, okay, well, what is going on here? And so as I began to think about this novel, I thought, I would like to talk about this in the context of a crime novel. And that's one way of looking at the world. And I think that's what's going to, if that continues, we will not be around as a species, a human species, even 100 years from now. And if we are, it's going to be a bunch of people around a campfire by Lake Michigan looking over at the blackened hunk of Chicago and saying, there used to be a city there. Let me tell you the mythical story of what that city was like, because we will not be, what we are. Because we're not adapting. We're not adapting and evolving. We got to where we were by what? By cooperating with each other. That's how we got to be here, starting from wherever we started, by looking out for each other while still being ourselves, individuals. We looked out for each other, whether we're Americans or just human beings, sharing the same biology and the same planet. And so I thought there's and I began to think about this, and there's another way, and so that's one way we can go, but there's another way we can go, which is to begin to stop living vertically, stop thinking vertically, and stop living horizontally. Begin to look at the world in a little bit different way, and begin to understand that we can't all get our way on every single thing, but we need to kind of live together. And go ahead.
Have a drink. And I was just going to interrupt and say, well, it's true that you're talking about technology is doing that. It's been the slogan, of an awful lot of businesses. You can have it,
Yep.
your way. So it isn't just technology driven. It's become kind of a brand for an awful lot of businesses.
It sells T-shirts, it sells shoes, it sells products, right? Because it appeals to what? It appeals to your ego. It appeals to your ego. Okay, and the egos have become supersized to the point where there's nothing else exists but me. Okay, and we can't have a world where everyone just thinks nothing else exists but me and a couple of my close friends, and everyone else can go pound sand, frankly. And that's not going to work in an existential way for society. And you can see that so clearly if you just look around. If you turn off Netflix and turn off your phone and just frankly look around, you can just see it as a train coming down the tracks.
You can go back and look, and society began to evolve when hunter-gatherers began to be farmers. You were fine on your own unless you needed a whole group of people to take down the mammoth.
Exactly.
But farming and so forth required much more cooperation, and so we began to knit ourselves together.
Right.
And now here we are. It's an interesting thing when you were talking about it. We see it here in fandom. It used to be. This is year 29 for the Poison Pen, so we have lived through a long era. And it used to be at book signings, people would come and stand in line and they'd be really pleased to have a word or two with the author. And it was relatively quick and it was all nice. Every person now in some of the, not every event, but the fan-heavy events, they come with cameras. Their whole reason for being here is to get a photo with the author so they can post it on their social media. They want to do post photos. They want to do all this other stuff. We are actually on Sunday going to be doing a large event, and we are going to take everybody's phone away from them and give it to a staff member so that we don't go through that, because it takes forever to manage that. And yet I understand why people want to be the narrators of their own story. Everybody has a Facebook page. Not everybody, but if you have a Facebook page, so I assiduously avoid doing all that. Then you need content, and in order to have content, you need to do all this. And I think when you talk about technology, part of it's the internet, but I think the phone is a super large role to play in all this.
Yeah, the phone. The phone is
It's like an ego thing. It's like, it has become basically a person's ego.
Well, just think about how many decisions are made for you every day by an algorithm. And you have to wonder about whether we actually still have free will. It decides how we get from point A to point B. It decides what we're going to eat because we go on Yelp. And how many things do we decide based not on what we think, but what some algorithm is telling us what to think? And so people talk about AI, artificial intelligence, like it's coming. It's already here. And it's already slipped under the skin of humanity and under your skin in a way that we don't fully fathom. But there's another way to look at the world, and that's kind of what Pulse is about. I began to read, it really started with the Dalai Lama in a book called The Universe in a Single Atom. And the Dalai Lama and Pema Chodron and Richard Rohr and Eckhart Tolle and a lot of these people, and people before them for millennia, mystics, have talked about unit of consciousness in Buddhism and just an energy in a way of looking at the world that connects all of us. And George Lucas talked about it in Star Wars as the Force. And what the Dalai Lama said in his book, In the Universe of Single Atom, was that they are now having a scientific basis for believing that actually exists, not just in the mind of mystics or religious folk or whatever, but there's actually a scientific basis to believe that we are connected in ways, not just amongst each other, but with the trees and with everything around us, in ways that we don't even begin to understand. And I'm talking about quantum physics, and there's some quantum physics, not a lot of quantum physics in the book, but a little bit. Concepts like entanglement. But they're just finding out things at the subatomic level, that the world does not work the way we think it works. And then in fact, everything is connected, and everything's connected by energy. And so that the concept of entanglement is basically that if I had a particle on this table here that was in what they call an entangled state with another particle, and I put that other particle on the edge of the Milky Way, 100,000 light years away, and I turn this particle like a half turn to the right, the particle out there would immediately move a half turn to the left, immediately. And no one knows how, or they can't be communicating any way we understand, because even traveling at the speed of light, the signal would take 100,000 years to get there, because it's 100,000 light years away. But this happens instantaneously, and no physicist really understands how and why this entangled state happens. They just know that it exists. And the same thing with superposition, which basically says that a particle can be in two places at the same time. And so they're seeing all of this, and what the Dalai Lama said is that we're beginning to see the scientific underpinnings of a spiritual belief that's been with us forever. And I was telling Barbara about this at dinner, that where does this go for the individual? Well, when I thought about this, I thought about we're so interested in the Western world with what's between our ears, as if that's all of the intellect that matters. Like your entire intellect is decided by the friggin' SAT or whatever it is that you took, or whatever you can see, whatever your conscious intellect, because that's our ego. Our ego is telling us our conscious intellect is what you are. When in point of fact, your heart is beating right now, your liver is going, your blood is flowing, there are billions of calculations being made in your body as we speak that are keeping all of you alive. And that's an intelligence. That's your intelligence. That's an intelligence that you have in your body that far outstrips anything that's between your ears. But we never tap into this. It lives in our stomach, and it lives in the rest of our body. We never tap into it.
Do you know what's a great example of that? Hiccups. Hiccups are, no, I'm serious. Hiccups are a function of your sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
If it gets a little jolt, you get hiccups, and they're extremely hard to break. Do you know what the only real good cure for hiccups is I've ever encountered? Citric acid. The absolute sure cure for hiccup is to go and ask for a slice of lemon or a slice of lime or grapefruit. Oranges are too sweet. If you bite into it, the citric acid will reset your sympathetic nervous system. But hiccups are involuntary. You don't ask for them, you don't want them, and you can't wish them away. You have to do something to break that cycle. So your body runs on a sympathetic nervous system that controls your breathing and your heart rate and your blood pressure and all the rest of it. And then you have your conscious, system, those things that you're doing. And that's what you're really talking about.
Yeah.
These two systems.
These two systems. And so, there are times where you just walk up and you meet somebody and you're like, right? I got a bad feeling, right? Well, do you think those feelings just come from the sky? No, they don't. They come from you. That's your body. That's your intelligence telling you something about like a situation or a person, good or bad or whatever it might be. Okay? And if we pay attention to that stuff, that's a whole nother level of intelligence that we're just not tapping into. And so I was thinking about all of this stuff, and I thought I would love to find a character, basically, who lives at this nexus between science and spirituality, and is able to see this world, and is able to see the kind of infrastructure that we live in a way that's kind of enhanced beyond what we all live in the same infrastructure, but we just can't see it. Some people can see it more than others. The Dalai Lama, I'm sure, can see it perfectly. But I created this character, Daniel, who was a 16-year-old kid living in Boston, and he basically is just beginning to understand that he has some powers. He's able to slip inside your skin, and not just kind of feel what you feel, but actually become you for a moment. And it's not just that. He's finding out things about himself that he doesn't fully understand at all. And even as these powers are beginning to develop in the opening pages of the book, in the opening chapters, his brother Harvey, who's a sophomore at Harvard and a football player, is murdered, and it's found that. And Harvey has brought him up, and Harvey's pretty much his whole world. And when Harvey is murdered, it just completely unmoors Daniel. And when I didn't think about this when I was writing the book, but as I was afterwards, I was thinking about that, and I thought about 9/11. Okay, and it's a little bit of an aside, but when 9/11 happened, okay, I think everybody in this country collectively had a moment where they were completely unmoored from reality for a day or 2 days or a week or whatever it took. Okay, and that's what happens when, on an individual level, like for example, when you lose someone close to you, especially if it's a violent crime, a homicide, you become completely unmoored for like a day or two. You don't know where you are. You're kind of walking around in a fog. All of the things that you think, all of the things, individual ego things that you've developed, your routines, your coffee, your house, your 401k, all that stuff just goes away, and nothing else really matters because of this cataclysmic event, right? And that's what 9/11 was. And what happened after 9/11? What did we do? People reached out to each other. Why did they reach out to each other? Because all of this other stuff was gone. And the fragility and the falseness of all this stuff was gone. And we realized all we have really is each other. And for a while, that's how people react in those kinds of situations. Now, unfortunately, that wore off for humanity, and we came back to being sort of very tribal and even more so than we ever have been. But for Daniel, that was the effect. It completely unmoored him. And he has these burgeoning powers, and he has a choice. He can either go out and use these powers to find the guy that killed his brother and kill him and seek revenge, or he can use these powers to go another way, which is another path in the book. I don't want to give away too much of the book. But that's kind of the choice that he has. And at the same time, there's a couple cops in Boston who are investigating the case, and they're racing to find the killer at the same time as Daniel is finding the killer. And his powers will begin to affect them and affect everybody in the book. So that's kind of the architecture of the book. It was a fun book to write. It was an interesting book. I mean, it's the kind of book I think that gives publishers and editors, they're a little leery of these kinds of books because there's some stuff in the book that very much is a supernatural sort of manifestation of Daniel's power.
Maybe not supernatural.
Maybe not
but that's the
supernatural.
point,
Right. Yeah, and so I think that sometimes gives people who just want straight crime novels, or someone that has to market a crime novel, they'd be like, oh, well, there's some other things in here. I don't know which genre to put it into. But I don't really worry about that when I write them. I was definitely influenced by, I went to a school called Boston Latin School in Boston, and I took like 10 years of Latin and 6 years of ancient Greek because I took it in college as well. And so I was definitely influenced by Ovid. I read, one of my favorite authors was Ovid, and he had a famous poem called The Metamorphoses, which is a really brilliant poem. And you'll see some of the writing in there is definitely influenced by him and by Ovid. So that was fun to kind of dabble into that. I hadn't looked at that in a long time. And it was an interesting book to write. I never know where my books are going to go. I never outline them. I just kind of let them go. And I did the same thing with this one. I didn't really know exactly where Daniel was headed in this journey that he took, but I thought he wound up in a good place. It was a good place for me. And when the ending of the book presented itself, like most of my books, I was like, oh yeah, of course, this is how it's always been. I just have to spend enough time with the story and the characters to have them tell me what it was they're all about. So.
Well, you've written some traditional crime novels.
Yeah.
You wrote a very good book about the Innocence Project.
Yep.
Was that your last book or the one before?
No, that was my last one was Brighton, so it was
Okay, so it was the one before.
That. Yeah.
And then you wrote a really great book about the governor's wife. Do I have the title right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was fabulous and
Yeah.
probably,
Full.
once again, kind of
Yeah.
coming true. Right.
Yeah, no, this is the first one that hasn't been like a totally
Yeah.
fact-based, reality-based.
But, it's an interesting point that you brought up George Lucas and Star Wars, who kind of tapped into all of this a long time ago. Why? And I asked Daniel at dinner why this book had been optioned immediately for the movies. Because it isn't a traditional story. And why is it you think that, filmmakers have glommed onto it?
Well, it's very visual. There's a lot of visual possibilities with the book, but I think also there's a huge interest just out there in the world in sort of what exists beyond kind of humanity, whether you call it transhumanism or whatever you want to call it. There's a big interest these days. I think a lot of people feel we're coming to some sort of existential point with humanity where something's going to have to change. Either we're going to start to, just kind of fail as a species, or we're going to have to come to some deeper understanding of who we are and what we're all about. And for some people, that means having an elevated kind of sense of humanity. And for some people, that means the merging of man and machine with artificial intelligence. I don't really go that way in this book at all, but I do think that the idea that there's something larger than us, outside of us and also within us, than what we see and what we hear and what we see right in front of us is very interesting to a lot of people.
Well, it is. And it's also one of the questions is how dangerous is it? If we let machines take over us, if we have things implanted in us that are making decisions, then You know, I mean, remember Space Odyssey 2001 and all that kind of. It's interesting that some of this was explored in film.
Yeah.
You know, a long time ago.
Well, I think the next age will be, from a technical standpoint, I think it'll be the quantum age. I think quantum computers, which are going to be here soon, I think, will totally change everything that we can do. So a quantum computer would be, a computer can exist in one of two states, either 0 or 1, in terms of computing. A quantum computer can exist in thousands of states at the same time. If they get it down, they're working at your alma mater at Stanford and at Northwestern. They're working on some prototypes of it, and no one really knows exactly where they are with quantum computers because whatever country perfects quantum computing, you're going to have a huge advantage in the world because it'll immediately be able to decrypt every single code that exists. Like with the touch of a key, you'll be able to decrypt every single bank code, every single nuclear code, every single code that exists in the analog and the non-quantum world. And so China's trying to get that technology, obviously, and we are as well. But once that comes on board, it'll start out big like that, but then it'll start to trickle down to phones and things like that. And what the applications are going to be up to the minds of engineers. But the one quantum computer will be thousands and thousands of times more powerful than all the computing power in the world combined right now. If you put it all together, one quantum computer could wipe out all of that, like 1,000 times over. That's how powerful it will be. It's on a totally different order.
But, you know, interestingly enough, this phone right here, you know, could wipe out anything from 20 years ago. You know, it's a super powerful thing.
Right.
You know, one of the interesting and curious dynamics, I was thinking about this, and it reminds me of Joseph Cannon's wonderful book, Los Alamos, in that we seem unable to stop investigating or pushing or creating whatever process it is, trying to go in some direction, even though we know it might be really harmful. And it reminds me of the guys that developed the bomb. They just couldn't stop, even though it might turn out to be a disaster, and they couldn't resist testing it to see if it actually worked. You know, and I mean, so in a way, you know, we may be truly, you know, the seeds of our own destruction may be in play in the sense that, you know, we keep pushing towards all of this stuff, and we don't really know what the consequences of
Without a doubt.
will be.
Without a doubt.
I mean, so far we haven't had another nuclear war, but, you know, we tremble on it. Those of us who remember the Cold War, for example, how scared we all were, and here we are again.
Well, I think what has balanced our you know, I think that desire to discover and to push the boundaries of knowledge will always be there. And people are always going to have ego, and people are always going to want to achieve things for whatever reason. Good reasons, altruistic reasons, selfish reasons, but
or just to know.
Or just to know, right. But that has always been counterbalanced by an understanding of some kind of commonality. Like the human race has certain common things that we can all agree on. And we
None
have
of
that
it has ever been completely cataclysmic.
No,
you know?
right.
I mean, any of this we've done might take out some section of the world or humanity, but we've never actually pushed it to the point where, in fact, we could just blow up the whole thing, and that will be it. You know?
But I'm concerned that we're reaching that point. I'm concerned that there's less and less and less common ground, commonality between individuals, never mind countries, just and then people at the bus stop. You know, there's less and less commonality in caring at all about, like, because we're just conditioned to live for ourselves, because we live in these bubbles, these technological bubbles. And when you extrapolate that over millions of people and billions of people, the potential, the equation shifts, and the potential for something cataclysmic to happen with these toys that we have, I think, is increasing.
Well, and at the same time, I think there's a real lack of critical thinking. I was mentioning to Michael that we had dinner in Santa Fe with an author we're very fond of, whose grandchildren were there. And my husband asked the grandson, who had expressed some opinion, about, you know, how he had formed his political views, and his answer was it just showed up in his phone. There's no critical thinking involved at all. In other words, you set your phone for a feed, you know, and then that's how these bots and so forth have been able, you know, to I think the most distressing thing about where we are is whichever side you fall on, politically or whatever, is what we have learned about our fellows. Whether you're on the liberal side and you just can't believe how awful, or if you're on the conservative side and you think the liberals are just, I mean, whatever side you're on, I think it's been very difficult to all of a sudden, we thought we had some sort of, as you say, a community. We could have a town meeting, and we could arrive at consensus. And then all of a sudden, we're discovering that, in fact, whichever side you fall on, we're sort of appalled by the people on the other side.
Well, I just think that when you don't communicate daily, you have less tolerance for anyone's opinion, and you don't learn how to have any kind of communication skills and compromise. And it's not just, I mean, everyone talks about the political lens, and that certainly dominates these days, but it's just not the political lens. It's across the board in terms of just how we all are. I teach at Northwestern, I teach in a journalism school, and a lot of the students have real problems just talking to people, just sitting down and talking to somebody, because they haven't talked that much to other human beings in any significant way, other than a few people that they really know really well, like their family and a few friends. But in journalism, you have to sit down and talk to somebody who you don't know and ask them questions they may not like, or whatever. And they don't have any of those people skills that I don't take it for granted anymore because I've seen it, but I think a lot of people do. And it's not just younger millennials. It's not just them at all. I think a lot of older people think it is, but they need to look in the mirror and say, well, how many people have you talked to lately, other than the few people that you want to hear from? How many shows have you watched that doesn't agree with things that you already think? Well, then that's a problem. You need to go spend more time with the other side of whatever it might be to get to understand that. If you really want to find a common ground, I question whether people really want to find a common ground. I don't think they really do. I think they all sit there and say, yeah, but you know what? I want to win. And you know what? We're all going to say that until we just go away. Yeah, right.
Don't you think, too, that the ability to do this anonymously has a lot to do
Yes.
with, I think the fact that, when I write to you, that I'm writing to you, or I'm quoting Patrick or somebody else in the bookstore, I'm not just sending out something that you don't have any reason to associate with something. And yet,
Yep.
a huge amount of the world is functioning off completely anonymous
Yes.
commentary or comments, or you don't know if the person on Yelp who's recommending the restaurant's a real person who's ever haven't been there, or whether it's actually somebody the restaurant is hired to do that. You can hire people to increase your Twitter numbers. You can there are people making whole careers out of just manipulating numbers, so you can look like a quote influencer because you have followers, and then you might get ads, and then people will pay you for your opinions and so forth. And it's really scary because you can't really trust the source very often anymore.
I agree, and it goes back to the point that you made, that the technology is in charge. Are we still in charge? I don't think we are. I think the technology is in charge. The technology is deciding everything, and we, like you said, we can't decide what's real and what isn't because of the technology. Because everything you're talking about is seen through a technological lens. Whether it's anonymous this or anonymous that, it's all online. And because we can't see through our technology now, we don't know what to trust. And as a result, we're thrown into all kinds of confusion, and we lose our way. The technology doesn't lose its way; we lose our way. And then all kinds of other actors come in to manipulate us, either to get into our pockets or to influence an election, whatever it might be. But people talk about influencing the election; they're much more interested in the money in your pocket, okay? And they're influencing you in all kinds of ways to get at that. All right, and so, but the technology is in charge. The technology drives everything, and you would think that we'd be in charge of technology, but I don't think we are.
Here's a weird example. We post, we do, as we are doing, Facebook Live, and Patrick opened a YouTube channel because not everybody wants to be on Facebook anymore, so YouTube is an alternative. So I won't mention any names, but we posted one of our author events a while back on YouTube, and 3 or 4 days later, we get a message from YouTube saying your video has violated our content agreements, and so we've taken it down, and now there's a strike against you. You only get 2 more, but if you want, you can protest it or you can appeal it over here. So Patrick said to me, what could possibly have been in this YouTube that would have, would cause this? So I watched it all over again. I couldn't find anything. So we appealed it. We said, you can't talk to a person. This is an entirely, whatever it is. And so the very next day, they wrote back and said, well, we reviewed, and it's all fine. We put it back up. You don't have a strike against you. Now, here's what I concluded from this. 2 things. One, they don't review it the first time. If anyone lodges a protest, they just throw it at you. They don't review it. They just say, there's been a protest, we're taking it down, you can appeal it if you want to. So the onus is on you to do that, even though you have no idea who protested or why, or in fact, you can talk to a human being about it. All right? So anyone can in fact now sabotage whatever you're doing by a protest, and unless you stay proactive, you can't fix it. And the other thing is that because it's anonymous, any wingnut, could watch this thing and say, it could be a demented fan of some other author, it could be, an ex-husband, it could be, there's any number of things that could have prompted it. But there's no people involved in this until, you get, and maybe I don't know whether their policy also is, if you do in fact push back, and appeal it, maybe nobody ever watches it that time either. They just conclude that it's going to be okay. We don't know what the problem was, who complained, who watched it, whether in fact anybody ever watched it, or they just put it back up because we entered a protest.
Yeah, and the note you got.
It's a weird.
The note you got back might not have even been written by a human. It could have been just.
Well, I don't think it was. Yeah. No, I think it was all auto-generated.
Yeah.
But the whole process was completely impersonal.
Right.
You don't know. The only thing that you can surmise is that there was a complaint from somebody. But after that, the whole thing may have been entirely, machine driven. But now I'm looking at a universe. We post these things every day. Are we going to have to go through this every time we put up a video on YouTube? It's a huge time sink if you have to do this stuff. So, they can wear you out by attrition if they want to. Let's say there's a whole group of people that decide that they're mad at this author, or it's, somebody's ex-spouse, or whatever it is. What if they go on appealing it? It could be an entire chain. And you don't know whether YouTube is over there paying any attention.
Well, George Orwell had it right?
He did.
He did.
He did. 1984. Just jump it up 40 years.
That? It kind of feels that way. I tell people just that to the extent that they can't get off their devices, and sometimes you can't for business reasons like that. You have to deal with that. But to the extent that you can, this sounds like a crazy thing, but just talk to other human beings, as much as you can, without the benefit of a device, and see where that goes.
Don't take your phone to dinner. Is a really good rule.
Just see where it goes, and because I think that the only way to solve this is to change the equation is individually to start doing that. And certainly as a writer, I do that more than most people, just because I write about people, so I have to do it. Part of my job is to watch people and to talk to people, and as a journalist as well, to do that. But I think it's a good thing to do. It sounds like it's an obvious thing to do, but I feel like we really need to reemphasize that and make that a priority in our lives to do that and to understand other people and to quit thinking about ourselves first. So when you do talk to someone, don't talk to them just because you want to get something from them. It's okay, well, I want to get something from you. Give me my coffee or whatever it might be, or some of my friends and family, it's like I'm talking. You know, they're talking. And it's like, are you listening, or are you just waiting for a pause so you can jump in and just start talking? You know, because you really because I just sometimes I'll say stuff just to see whether or not, you know, I'll say like crazy things and they just blow right past it. You know, and they're like, oh yeah, that's great. You know, and it's like, you know, to learn to listen and to really listen to people as well as talk. But that involves, like for Daniel, putting yourself in other people's. I mean, Daniel's powers are basically empathy and compassion on steroids, you know, in a very dramatic sort of way in the book. But that's the core of it. It's like put yourself in other people's shoes. And it can be the worst person in the world. I mean, I've interviewed serial killers, and I try to put myself in their shoes. And that's not so a pleasant place to be, but it's an interesting place to be. And I come out a better person for it when I understand somebody who... I remember I interviewed this guy who was the night before he was going to be executed in Chicago. And he told me all about how he killed this guy, but then he went into how he was brutally abused by his uncle and his dad from, you know, the age of 9 until like 13. You know, they would handcuff him to the table and just do some horrible things to him. And he went through chapter and verse of what it was all about. And this guy knows he's gonna lie to me because he was executed a few hours later. And so you learn stuff. You learn stuff about him, and you learn stuff about the world, and you can't get that from YouTube. You know, and you're not gonna get it. You're not gonna get it from a movie because those are all selfish, one-way conversations, right? And that's not what we're here for, frankly. That is not why we're here, okay? And so if you think that's why we're here, you're wrong, and you're gonna have a very, very empty life. Is, I guess, basically what some of the book tells people. You're gonna have a very empty life, and you're gonna get, you know, more anxious, more angry, and just more isolated. And you won't understand why either. I really do believe that. And so I think, you know, that the extent that, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know which way the tide's turning. I mean, certainly when you look at the headlines, you think there's no way that what I'm talking about could really happen. But I do think a lot of people are rethinking this in a very quiet way, and hopefully they are. Hopefully they are, because I think it's more than just like convenient. It's important that people think about this because it impacts some very large things in this world. Not to mention the way we relate to this planet. What also cracks me up is people say we have to save the Earth, you know? As if we're not part of the Earth. Like, we're part of the Earth, okay? We're not separate from the Earth, okay? We're part of this. We're not, just because we're self-aware doesn't mean we're not part of everything. That's the only thing that separates us, is we're self-aware. That's it. And you know what? Maybe there are other things self-aware, they're just not telling us that they're self-aware. Anyways, so that's a little bit of the book.
That's one of the great things about books, though, is that books become a vehicle for us, you know,
Yes.
to develop community, to
Yes.
read them, share our reading thoughts, and, you know, experience. And maybe one reason why book clubs have become so popular. But
Totally.
this, in its way, despite everything we've talked about, really is a detective story. But we didn't get to talk to you about Brighton. So can
Okay.
we go back?
Yeah,
Because you
sure.
weren't here for Brighton.
Okay.
Tell
I
us a
can
little bit.
remember.
Can you remember? Tell us a little bit about Brighton.
Yeah, so Brighton is Brighton's a story where I grew up in Brighton, so it's set right where I grew up, and you know, it was a fun story to write. It was a hard story to write because you know, you learn a lot. Again, I learned a lot of things about myself, right? So one of the things you learn is that your memories of where you grew up are not what you think they are, which I already knew just from doing a lot of murder trials. That eyewitness identification stuff, very fragile. Memory's very fragile. But the things you think you remember didn't really turn out that way. So I sit down with, like, you know, people that I grew up with, and we can't even decide. We can't even agree on like where the drugstore was on the block. You know, and we all lived on the same block. You know, and you're like, oh yeah, of course it was right. No, it was over here. No, it was over here. You know, like, and so that's the first thing you learn. And then you begin to think about the people that you grew up with. So I grew up in Brighton at that time, was very much of a Mystic River kind of neighborhood, and I grew up with, you know, I have 5 sisters and 1 brother, and we grew up in basically a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and dad in 1 bedroom, and then we had 6 of us, and my youngest sister wasn't alive at the time when we were living there, but the 6 of us kind of slept in the other bedroom, and it was kind of like that up and down the block. There was like 13 kids over here, 12 kids over here, 6 over there, and those neighborhoods are gone now. Those neighborhoods are kind of gone in Boston because they've just been kind of eroded away by gentrification and time, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just how things are, and so. But I wanted to write a book that kind of recaptured that neighborhood and set a murder mystery right in that neighborhood, because one of the things that books does is it hopefully transports you back to different times. So when I read Charles Dickens, I feel like I'm transported back to England. Or if I read Sherlock Holmes, I'm back on B. Baker Street, right? And that's there forever. You know, there's a certain finality to that that was really appealing to me. So I wanted to capture some of the things that I remembered from that time growing up there, and put it into a story and put it into a novel, so that people could later on, because once things are gone, if it's not in a book or somewhere like that, then people are never going to know about it. And so it was a fun book to write. It was it's a story about two kids who get involved in I don't want to give away too much of it, but a crime. They get involved in a murder when they're very young, and one of the kids is like 14 and the other kid's like 17. And so that's a very big difference in age at that age. 17-year-old's a lot older than a 14-year-old. And the 17-year-old is kind of like a tough guy. And he grew up, I had kids like this that I grew up with, who were like, I remember very clearly, would tell me, because it was a rough neighborhood. So they would say, Michael, I was born in Brighton, I live in Brighton, I'm going to die in Brighton, I'm going to be a car mechanic. And this is like we're 12 years old, And I'm like, what are you talking about? You can go to this, you can go to college, you can go do whatever you want. No, and there was lots of kids like that, and that's just exactly how it turned out for them. And they were like, and they would tell me, you're going to go do this, and you're going to go do that, and so there's a lot of that going on that went on in those neighborhoods where people understood, and maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy as to where they would be in life. And I didn't have that. I didn't know where I was going to be, but I didn't want to be there. I knew I wanted to try and get out somehow, and they were very supportive of that. A lot of these kids, and so this older kid, 17, they get involved in this murder. They basically, this kid gets killed, and he decides. He says, "I'm staying," and the younger kid, who's kind of like a brother to him, it's not his brother, but it's kind of like a brother. He said, "You got to go," and they ship him out of town like that night, and he's gone, and because he knows, that shit's going to come down for this killing. And so the kid says, "I'll take the rap, you take off." And the younger kid doesn't want to take off, but his parents throw him, his uncle throws him in the back of a car, and they ship him out to New York. And he never comes back to Boston for 20 years. And the other kid stays and faces the music on the murder, which never gets solved, and so he never goes to jail for it. But everybody in the neighborhood kind of knows that he did it, which kind of enhances him in some ways. But then flash forward in the book, and the younger kid comes back and is a reporter for the Globe. He's an investigative reporter, comes back into the city, and eventually comes back into Brighton to investigate a new set of murders that are going on in the neighborhood. And now they're older; they're both in their 40s, and they've never spoken. And these new murders eventually tie into the old murder that they both know about, that has never actually been investigated either. And so, kind of goes from there. So that one was optioned by the guy that did The Departed in the town, Graham King, for film, and this one was optioned by 21 Laps Entertainment that does Stranger Things on Netflix, and they did a great movie called Arrival with Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner a couple of years ago. So we'll see. These things, I know the screenplay is being written for this one. But they're kind of up in the air as to where they go from there. I don't have any control over it.
There's never any real certainty, is it, until
No,
it actually shows up on the
isn't.
screen.
Yeah.
Right. So what happened to your wonderful lawyer in Chicago? You wrote a number of books about him. But
Michael Kelly?
Yeah, Michael's been kind of missing in action.
Yeah, he
here.
might come back. I mean, I
love
have
Michael Kelly. Those are the first books that Michael Harvey wrote that we read here.
I'll bring him back. I mean, I think I guess I just don't want to write the same character over and over. So I've done a couple of standalones. I'm thinking of doing something next on the Gardner Museum heist. Do you know what that is?
Yeah. Actually, there have been a couple of recent books about it.
Well, those were nonfiction, so this would be like a fictionalized. So the Gardner Museum heist was in Boston, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, on St. Patrick's Day. Actually, March 18th, the morning after St. Patrick's Day. two guys pull up to this museum. So this museum is a beautiful museum. It's kind of like it's like someone's house. That Isabella
It
Stewart.
was someone's
It was
house.
someone's house. It was her house.
Actually was her
Yeah,
house.
and so she filled this in the 1800s, in the end of the 1890s, early 1900s. She filled it with these incredible Rembrandts and Monets and Vermeers and all these beautiful, incredible paintings and statues from sculptures from all over the world. And she set them up in this house that had apartments above it, and it's just a beautiful place. And when she died in like 1925, she said that nothing could be added to the museum and nothing could be taken away, and it would stay there in perpetuity. And it's right behind the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's a beautiful museum. It's still there, and if you go there, definitely go visit it. But in 1990, on March 18th, early morning of March 18th, two guys pull up to the museum, two Boston cops, and they bang on the door, and the security guys let them in and say, "We got a report of a disturbance." They're like, "No, everything's fine." They go up and they subdue the two security guards, tie them up, blindfold them, put them in the basement, and then they're there for about 25 minutes, and they take 13 pieces of art, two Rembrandts, a Vermeer, I think a Monet, and then they're gone. They're gone in a half an hour, and it's and none of the artwork has ever been seen again. So this was 30 years ago, and it's worth about $500 million, and no one knows what any of the artwork is. It's the largest unsolved art heist in the country.
And the frames are still hanging there.
The frames are still hanging, yeah.
If you
So
go to the museum.
Yeah, so if you go in the Garden Museum, you can see where the Rembrandts were, because she placed everything in certain places in each room to create certain effects, you know? So like Rembrandt's only seascape was there. Christ in the Sea of Galilee was one of the famous ones that were taken. It was the only seascape that Rembrandt painted. And there's a big empty frame where they cut them right out of the frames and just took them. And they thought Whitey Bulger did it. Everyone's got different. NPR's got a great podcast that they just ran about like all the different theories as to who did it. They think it was some kind of Boston crime syndicate, but the interesting thing is that they've never turned up. Usually these things will turn up somewhere, because usually they get split up and sold to whoever.
Well, the hope is that they weren't destroyed. Because that is one possibility, but
Yeah.
everybody hopes that there's a lot of thought about whether they were collateral, for something, in one of the crime families and all. But sometimes these thefts, turn out to be by the most insignificant people. Remember the one from Tucson, from the University of Arizona, and they finally found those, two people. I mean, who would have guessed? And
So she was downstairs. One of them was downstairs talking to the security guard, and the other one goes up and just cuts the painting.
the guy does. But
Right on
as
the
far
hook.
as
Right on.
anyone can tell, they just took it home and hung it in their bedroom, and there it was for 25 years.
And then they passed away, right?
And they died, and when they went in
Yeah.
to their home, there's this thing, and somebody said, that really looks like. But I mean, it was, why did they do it? I mean, they're really, they just wanted to have it and take it home. It wasn't even a painting you'd necessarily want to live with, but
Well, there's only like 35 Vermeers in the world.
I know.
And that was one of them.
I went to, years ago in London, Lindsay Davis took me to see at, I can't remember the name of the gallery, but it's a famous gallery in London. Anyway, they had brought in all the Vermeers, which is a really weird thing to see them all together, because from that you recognize how poor he was. He only had like one tablecloth and one table, and I mean, if you see all of his paintings, you recognize that it's the same thing over and over again. But there was a missing one. They also had an empty frame for the Gardner Vermeer, because it was the only one that they couldn't, show at the gallery. So it's been a huge deal. It would be fun to speculate on what happened to it. Of course, you're always running the risk that at some point they may solve the crime, and your book then becomes, totally irrelevant.
Yeah, that's a danger. That's a danger. I guess I could do some quick rework, but chances are not. I mean, who knows?
You'd be lucky if they solved it while you were writing it. Man, wouldn't that ever be brilliant?
That might help sales, yeah. So I don't know. I have two very different takes on that book. I've never really had this happen to me before, but I have two completely different approaches to it. Yeah, two completely different approaches. One of which is a little otherworldly, and the other is just a straight crime novel set in the current day, with some dipping back to 1990.
Well, we can really hope. The Mona Lisa did make it back to the Louvre,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, eventually,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
was the great fear that,
Yeah.
you know, it had been completely destroyed. So
But after
Yeah.
that, a Kelly book. After that, a Kelly book.
there
for
will
sure.
be a Kelly
Yeah,
book.
I already know what I'm going to say.
Well,
Anyway.
I'm delighted to hear that. Any of you have questions that you would like to ask Michael? Don't be shy. No? Patrick?
You mentioned Whitey Bulger.
Yeah.
How much of a presence was he when you were growing up?
Um,
In town?
You know, well, I grew up in Brighton. He was in Salty, so my family lived in South Boston and moved to Brighton right before I was born. So I certainly knew of him. Everybody knew of Whitey, you know, but it was sort of like a, you know, it's kind of like a benevolent sort of thing, you know, in the way people talked about him. You know, everyone knew he was a crook. Everyone knew he ran the rackets in Boston, but we certainly didn't get all the details that we have now. And everyone knew he was killing people, you know, but.
Yeah, he wasn't really being benevolent.
Yeah, right. But it was kind of, but he also would give a lot of people in the neighborhood money and give people jobs, and you know, like these guys always do, you know.
He was a crook, but he was our crook.
Yeah, he was our crook, right. And so there was a certain, and his brother Billy Bulger was the Speaker of the State House. I mean, he was a huge politician. So there was just this incredible sort of thing, and Whitey was sort of always. And I remember thinking, well, or talking to people saying, well, why don't someone arrest him? You know, if everyone knows he's this crook and this racket guy, and his brother is running, you know, the State House, and well, why not? Well, if he's a crook, why don't they arrest him? You know, well, it's not that simple, you know. And then he just disappeared, and you know, became legend. But there was always a lot of kind of like that mystique around Whitey. You know, and that was it. I mean, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about him. He wasn't the only crook in town, so there was a lot of crooks.
I have a treat for you, because I just finished reading Mike Lupica's reboot of the Sonny Randall series by Robert Parker. If ever anyone, he's like the perfect person, but Whitey Bulger is this enormous presence in the book, because what's really going on is a war between two of the old Dons, an Irish one and an Italian one.
Yeah.
And Whitey just is, I mean, this is a great book. I don't read that many books, every single word anymore, because I don't really have time. I sat up with my Lupica. He's going to be here on November 29th, and I really recommend it. Some of you may think that, you know, writing on in the tradition of some of these now sadly deceased authors is not a good idea, but this is his own Sonny Randall. But boy, does he do a brilliant job on Boston and the crime. He's a reporter, you know, he's a sports writer, isn't he? Wasn't Mike Lupica?
Yeah,
You know, he wouldn't, I mean, I was sort of
news.
surprised, but I'm telling you, he is just, it's fabulous. I'm so excited about it. So if you really want to know about Mike Lupica, about Whitey Bulger and some of the Boston crime dons in a sort of Robert Parker take, this is your book.
Yeah, the other thing was that Whitey was Irish, and so that's a big part of it too. And it was when I was growing up in Boston. So like, you know, I'm Irish, and so everyone, you know, half the city's Irish, and so everyone, you know, like you take pride in, oh, he's Irish, so you know that's great, right? But you know, well, he's not Italian, you know, and you know, so he's not a mobster, you know, and I don't know, it was, but there was a lot of mystique around it. There was a lot of mystique around it. I'm sure he created it himself, but you know.
Undoubtedly he did. You'd enjoy the Lupica book too. It really,
it
really is terrific. I'm going to bring it in for you because I know that you will really like it. Does anyone else have a question? No? You're all sort of stunned, and you've been sitting here for an hour. So in that case, I think we should thank Michael Harvey for coming to see us again.
You guys, I have a question. Do you guys feel disconnected? Do you feel like that's going on?
My daughter is firmly connected to that. She lives in Casa Grande, which is an hour away. She's a single parent, and so that's a wonderful big network of people, relatives and none. It's been winnowed out some with politics because it hasn't taken much of anything for some people to just say, I don't like you anymore.
Yeah. There's a lot more of that
Friending
going
you
on.
on Facebook, it's very
I'm
hard
not
for
on Facebook,
teenagers.
I'm not even online. But it's a shouldn't say but, and it's annoying to be with her sometimes when I would rather just have
Yeah.
an open time of
Yeah.
if I think of something to say or if she thinks of something to say, but she's distracted with it, and but it's been a plus for her life, but and a lesser size negative for me.
I mean, the one thing I would say that you said about reading was like, you know, reading books to me is such a less reactive sort of thing to do. You know, it's so much less reactive in terms of just, it takes a while to read a book and you really have to think about things. And I think that's a good thing, a good process for human beings to go through. And again, something that technology short circuits in many ways. People don't think. They just kind of, because it's also immediate, you know. In a book, by its very nature, you can't really do that. And so I think that's, you know, if we can find more things like that, I think that's a good thing for the human mind to sort of be doing.
Well, she has one of the first Kindles in the world,
Yeah.
and they do a lot of audiobooks within the family because they've got to drive from Casa Grande to Phoenix off and on very often. And
Yeah, but even listening to a book is a good thing. The problem with the phone and all is that it's so quick, you know, that, well, no, it's that it interrupts things constantly. It's just constant, you know, and it's hard to find time, a period of time when you can actually sit down and read a book if you are tethered to technology. And, you know, most people who come here are readers, right? Otherwise, why would you be here? So I'm assuming that we all make time, and, you know, but Patrick and I, we talk back and forth on technology all day long, and I'm sure that both of us are living for the moment where we can say bye and go home and read a book. But it's hard, isn't it, Patrick? You know, I mean, the constant, and I noticed it while I was traveling. You know, I mean, I was gone for a long time, and I would get these, and I would say to people, I'm in Bucharest. Well, just send your photo and your resume, you know, because we want you to do this conference or something. And, you know, there's no concept that you're not there anymore. It's really difficult to, you know, to actually detach, isn't it?
Well, you know, you weren't really in Bucharest.
No,
part
I
of
was.
it was in.
Part of it was right here talking to
It was in
you.
but part of it was splintered off somewhere else, so you don't really get to experience. being
Well,
else.
my point was that nobody if I said to them, I am out of the country, no one cared. It was like, well, that's okay, but meantime, here's what I want, you know.
Well, you could turn the phone off.
Well, no, I really couldn't, because then Patrick would have been completely screwed. I mean, it was hard enough for him trying to manage his workload and mine. You're right, I could have, but it would have been totally unfair to everybody
Well,
here,
I'm not talking
including you.
24/7, but
Yeah,
you know,
well,
you
I
could turn
mean,
it off
you
for a
know,
certain
I tried to, you know, to ration it. The most reasonable thing to do is to put aside some time and then some time, you know, in the day, so you're not interrupting your day. But that's even hard to do when you're running a business anymore. Everyone's always available 24/7 is
Yeah.
kind of the way
Yeah.
it comes on. Do you find that your students do that? Do your students expect you know you're right there
No.
at the other end?
First day of class, I tell them, you know,
Uh,
I give them my phone number. I say only in cases of, like, you know, national emergency will you text me.
Yeah.
I mean, I let them text me actually, but not call me. So, like, but they don't text that much, you know. They, I think if you set relationships with people, but it's not a business, so, you know, it's a
Right.
different dynamic. But in a classroom, I set a, you know, a certain dynamic with them where I kind of tell them I expect them to be, you know, fully functioning. They're at Northwestern, and I expect them to be able to handle it. And if they really have a problem, fine. But I'm not here to you know, to babysit them, frankly. And they're fine. You know, actually they're fine. I mean, they like that. I think that they sometimes get a little too much, you know, not coddling, but yeah, a little too much. Yeah, well, you know, I'm not really sure the word. Not that word, but I guess just you know, they have too many barriers around them. Frankly, you know, they never allow them to make mistakes. You know, make some mistakes, and, you know, go ahead and do some things and fall down and scrape your knee, metaphorically, and that's okay. You know, that's a good thing. I mean, that's how journalists learn, and so they're okay to do that. When they hear that, they kind of light up a little bit. Most of them, a couple of them are like, but eventually they all do. So.
I wish we could get through a day without at least one giant screw up. I mean, you know, part of the success in staying in business is that you learn, you know, to deal with them when they happen. Some of them are hilarious, and many of them are completely unexpected. But I don't think there's a day, is there, when we're not thrown some absolutely amazing problem or a customer who has some truly amazing thoughts. We had one who wrote today who has bought a ticket among the 500 people that have bought a ticket for Sunday, and one of the staff wrote to me and said she would like to pick up her book today so she can read it and be prepared to talk to Diana on Sunday when she gets her book signed. And I said, well, you can tell her she's welcome to pick up her book, but her chances of having a conversation with Diana during the signing line with 500 people are 0. So, you know, I mean, you're coming back to that kind of, you know, it's all about me thing, you know, because if every person had a conversation, we would be there until Tuesday or something, you know. And I do find that, you know, fascinating is how to be polite to people that ask you for unreasonable things, you know, but they're still spending their money and supporting your store, and you want to be nice to them, and you don't want to, you don't want to say you idiot, you know, or whatever your normal response might have. Patrick is a genius at being polite at ridiculous requests. I don't know how you do it. You have so much more patience than I do, which is why you hardly ever send them to me to be solved. But it's true, you know, if you're dealing with a universe of people. You know, people do have different. I don't know how anyone could, for example, run a hotel today or a restaurant where everyone has a whole different food profile. You remember, you know, you used to go, your mother said to you, you know, go, and if you don't like it, just don't eat it or push it aside on your plate. Nobody does that anymore. You know, I mean, it's fascinating. Is it gluten-free? Do I have this? Do I have that? I don't really want, you know, I really don't know how people cope in restaurants or hotels. I'm just up on that because I've been traveling and watching it. You know, it's fascinating. Well, we digress. Let's ask Michael to go over to this handy little table and sign your books. Thank you so much for coming. We're having a wonderful historical afternoon on Saturday.